Thank you all so much for being here. It's always a pleasure to sit down with other creatives and kind of bounce ideas off each other. I feel like we're all learning as we grow, so it's an amazing opportunity to be here. So I'll start with asking Emilio, how do you balance artistic creativity with market demands?
Well, for me, creativity has always felt like a form of freedom. I get to experiment with materials, working with the artisans, playing with forms and ideas that reflect, a Belizean identity that I'm trying to define. But I've also learned that if I wanted to create a sustainable business, I have to think outside of like our bubble. Um, so the balance comes from like listening to my clients, listening to the market trends, and also listening to my artisans because they're the ones that are producing the materials. And so when I design, I normally would like create a draft of like a sketch, and then you make the materials, but I let the materials tell me what it will become. So during the experimentation, I know if like coconuts break, I've found that we have 23 different species of coconuts in Belize. You have the dwarf coconuts, you have the bigger coconuts, you have ones, the shells are thicker, the meat are thicker. And so in that process, I found like some you can use for jewelry, some you use in bags, depending on the strength, but that took years and months of, and that part is my fun part because my background is in science. I'm actually a civil engineer in my background, and I branched off into the artistic and the creative because, again, I get to work with people and the grassroots people and working in the rural communities. It was really beautiful. Um, so, and yeah.
And what role does Belizean culture play in shaping your design philosophy?
Well, the Belizean culture is actually my foundation. Um, I often describe it as like mestizaje. Mestizaje is the fusion of traditions, languages, and identities. And in design, that translates for me into blending things that might feel opposite, like rustic and refined, indigenous and contemporary, Caribbean and Central America, right? So every piece I design carries that cultural DNA. When I work with coconut shells or cohoon seeds, I do not just choose materials, I'm embedding a piece of our cultural landscape, our history, our people's resilience in my works. Um, that grounding in culture gives me the design authenticity, and that authenticity is what resonates for a global market.
How do you approach innovation while staying true to traditional craftsmanship?
But I don't see innovation and tradition as opposites, but more like partners. Tradition gives us the techniques, the knowledge, the wisdom of the hands that have been creating for generations, especially here in Belize. Like all my artisans, they go back 4 generations working with coconut, working with jipi japa. Um, and innovation is how you reinterpret those techniques for today's context. For example, the basket weaving is an ancient practice here, but instead of making baskets, coasters, I, I found instead I could collaborate with these artisans to transform the weaving into luxury handbags and even art installations. The hands are still moving at the same rhythm despite of the materials, but the output tells a new story. And so the innovation really is a act of respect, keeping traditions alive, by reinventing and evolving it.
Can you share a success story where a creative risk led to significant business growth?
Well, risk. Um, so actually, I'm a leather artisan. I started off, I lived in Antigua for 6, 7 years in Antigua, Guatemala. And there's like a village outside of Antigua that like resonated with me when I saw shoes. So I started making boots. And it was just for my personal curiosity that I started making shoes. And I came back home and I showed off my boots. And like my family and like other people saw it. And like I ended up getting 12 orders, at $900 a shoe as well. So I was like, whoa, so like that was the initial capital. I went back to Antigua and that gave me more capital to like experiment with other crafts. Like in Antigua is beautiful where you have the town and outside you have various different villages